A cop arrests tiny black twins just for selling lemonade. But when they quietly say, "Call our daddy," everything stops. Because their father is the U.S. Attorney General. Now the spotlight's on, and one small-town mistake is about to explode. What will their powerful father do? And how far will this cop fall before he finds redemption? The morning sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn of the modest White House on Maple Street. Birds chirped their cheerful songs from the branches of old oak trees that lined the peaceful neighborhood in Rosewood, Georgia. The tranquil Saturday morning was broken only by the scraping sound of plastic against concrete, as twin girls, Amari and Asha Holt, dragged their little blue table across their grandmother's driveway. "Careful, Asha," Amari called out as her sister stumbled slightly. Both girls wore matching yellow sundresses that caught the morning light, making them look like two little sunflowers bobbing across the lawn. Their sparkly jelly sandals twinkled with each step, leaving tiny imprints in the dewy grass. "I got it," Asha said softly, regaining her balance. Her small hands gripped the table leg tighter, her knuckles turning white with determination. "Where should we put it?" Amari surveyed the front yard with the serious expression of a business owner choosing the perfect location. She placed her hands on her hips and squinted against the sunlight. "Right there." She pointed to a spot near the mailbox. "That way everyone can see us when they drive by." Inside the house, their grandmother June Holt lay sleeping in her favorite armchair, a romance novel open on her lap. The TV hummed quietly in the background, its morning shows going unwatched. A thin Afghan covered her legs, rising and falling with each deep breath. She'd been told by her doctor to rest after her blood pressure had gotten too high earlier that week. The twins worked together with determination, setting their little table up just so. Asha pulled out two small folding chairs from behind a bush where they'd hidden them earlier that morning, struggling slightly with the metal frames that wanted to snap closed on her fingers. The sign, Amari remembered suddenly, her eyes widening. She darted back to the porch to grab their homemade masterpiece. The paper was slightly crumpled at the corners, but the words, 25-cent lemonade, stood out in wobbly purple crayon letters, surrounded by cheerful yellow suns and blue clouds. "Is it spelled right?" Asha asked, tilting her head as she looked at their handiwork. Her finger traced the letters uncertainly. "Course it is," Amari said confidently, though neither girl was entirely sure. They used strips of clear tape from their grandmother's desk to carefully attach the sign to the front of their table, smoothing out the bubbles with small, determined fingers. Across the street, behind delicate lace curtains, Mrs. Evelyn Pruitt stood watching. Her thin lips pressed together as she observed the twins, alone and unsupervised. Her fingers drummed against her windowsill, creating a nervous rhythm. The tapping grew faster as the minutes passed. Back at the stand, Amari carefully poured lemonade from a plastic pitcher into tiny paper cups, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated on not spilling. The sweet tart smell of the drink wafted up in the warm air. Asha arranged store-bought cookies on a paper napkin, making sure they formed a perfect circle, nudging each one into place with meticulous care. "When we get lots of money," Asha whispered excitedly to her sister, her dark eyes sparkling, "we can buy that tea set from the store. The pink one with the flowers and the gold edges." "And candy," Amari added with a gap-toothed grin. "Lots and lots of candy. Maybe even chocolate bars." A jogger passed by, lifting his hand in a friendly wave but continuing on his way, earbuds firmly in place. An elderly couple walking their small dog smiled at the girls but didn't stop. The dog yapped once, straining toward the lemonade stand before being gently tugged away. The twins remained optimistic, straightening their cups and rearranging their cookies for the 10th time. The sound of a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street, its steady hum mixing with the birdsong. The morning was warm, but not yet hot. Perfect weather for selling lemonade. The girls swayed slightly in their chairs, humming a song they'd learned in preschool, their small feet dangling above the ground. Mrs. Pruitt's face tightened as she watched the scene unfold. Her right hand clutched her old cordless phone, thumb hovering over the numbers. A frown deepened the lines around her mouth. "This isn't right," she muttered to herself. "No supervision at all. Anything could happen to those children. She paced away from the window, then back again, unable to tear her gaze away. The twins had started playing pat a cake while they waited for customers, their sweet giggles carrying across the street. But Mrs. Pruitt didn't see two innocent children having fun. She saw danger, disorder, rules being broken. "Someone needs to do something," she said firmly to herself, nodding as if agreeing with an invisible companion. Her fingers moved decisively across the keypad, dialing the police non-emergency line she kept posted next to her phone, the paper yellowed with age. The phone rang twice before a dispatcher answered. Mrs. Pruitt's voice took on a concerned tone, though her eyes never left the little lemonade stand across the street. "Yes, hello," she said primly. "I need to report something concerning in my neighborhood." She paused, listening to the dispatcher's response. "There are two very young children, completely unattended, out on the street." She emphasized the word completely with a slight tremor in her voice. Another pause as she listened, her lips pursing tighter. No adults anywhere in sight. They've set up some kind of stand. It looks very suspicious. Her voice dropped slightly, as if sharing a secret. "Right in the front yard, yes, who knows what might happen to them." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, asking for more details about the location. Mrs. Pruitt provided the address, watching as Asha carefully straightened their sign for the umpteenth time, and Amari poured another cup of lemonade, just in case a customer came along. "Thank you," Mrs. Pruitt said finally into the phone. "I appreciate your help with this situation. I'm just concerned for their welfare. You understand?" As she hung up the phone, a police radio squawked faintly in the distance. Mrs. Pruitt remained at her window, scowling at the cheerful scene across the street, convinced she had done the right thing, the neighborly thing. The twins continued their innocent play, unaware of the call that had just been made. Asha hummed softly as she rearranged the cookies once again, while Amari practiced her best sales pitch. "Ice-cold lemonade. Only 25 cents. Best in the whole neighborhood." Their grandmother slept peacefully inside, the TV still droning quietly as the morning sun climbed higher in the Georgia sky, promising a day full of possibilities, both good and bad. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Officer Hank Miller's patrol car as he sat slouched beneath the weathered Evergreen Pines subdivision sign. The faded green letters seemed to mock the pristine image the neighborhood tried to maintain. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand, his movements slow and heavy like his thoughts. His father's photograph stared back at him from its place on the dashboard, a stern-faced man in his dress blues from 20 years ago. The edges of the photo had begun to curl, much like the memories that kept surfacing uninvited in Hank's mind. He'd tucked the picture there the day after the funeral, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was habit. His father had always watched over his shoulder, even when he wasn't there. The radio crackled to life, breaking through the humid silence of the car's interior. "Unit 247. Respond to possible child endangerment at 1542 Maple Avenue. 2 minors reported unsupervised. Over." Hank's jaw tightened as he reached for the radio. "Copy that, dispatch." "Unit 247 responding." His voice came out gravelly, unused since his morning coffee. Another waste of time, he thought. Another nosy neighbor with nothing better to do than cause trouble. He'd seen it 100 times before. Kids playing in their own yards, someone calls it in, and he has to go through the motions. Write up a report, check the boxes. Just like his father taught him. Procedure above all else. The cruiser's engine rumbled to life and Hank pulled away from the curb. As he drove, the streets of Rosewood blurred together. All identical houses with identical lawns and identical problems. His father's voice echoed in his head. "You can't fix everything, son. Sometimes you just gotta follow protocol and move on." The last conversation they'd had was about protocol too, about doing things by the book, about maintaining order. Now his father was gone, and all those rigid rules felt hollow, like a uniform with no one inside it. The funeral played back in his mind as he turned onto Oak Street, the empty chairs where family should have been. the few department colleagues who showed up out of obligation rather than respect. The weight of all the things left unsaid pressing down on his chest like a bulletproof vest worn too tight. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he made another turn. The truth was, he'd been relieved when his father died. Relieved and guilty about feeling relieved. No more disapproving looks. No more lectures about proper procedure. No more comparing every decision to how things were done in his day. The street signs blended together until he found himself on Maple Avenue. The pavement shimmered with heat waves, distorting the view ahead. And then he saw them. Two little girls in matching yellow dresses, sitting behind what looked like a plastic play table. Their small hands waved enthusiastically as his cruiser approached, their faces lit up with innocent excitement. They thought he was a customer. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. These weren't endangered children. They were just kids being kids, selling lemonade on a hot summer day. The kind of thing his father would have called disorder in the neighborhood. The kind of thing that required proper intervention. Hank pulled the cruiser to a stop across from their stand, gravel crunching under the tires. The girls' smiles grew wider, their little hands sticky with what he assumed was lemonade as they waved more vigorously. He could see the amateur sign now. 25-cent lemonade written in the wobbly handwriting of someone just learning their letters. With a deep sigh, he pushed his sunglasses up onto his head, revealing eyes that had seen too much and slept too little. The door creaked as he stepped out into the heavy Georgia heat. His boots made a harsh sound against the gravel as he approached the stand, feeling every bit as out of place as a snowman in summer. The girls looked up at him with matching expressions of pure joy, completely unaware of why he was really there. Their innocence made his chest tight. This was what his father would have called a situation requiring official response. But looking at their bright faces, all Hank could see were two kids doing exactly what kids should be doing on a Saturday morning. His boots continued to crunch against the gravel as he drew closer to the stand. The sound seemed to echo in his ears, reminding him of the footsteps at his father's funeral, slow, measured, procedural, just like everything else in his life had become. The memory of that day hung around him like the humidity, suffocating, inescapable. 6 officers in uniform had carried the casket, their faces blank as stone. Hank had stood ramrod straight, just as his father would have expected, not a tear in sight. Proper procedure, even in grief. Officer Miller approached the lemonade stand, his boots crunching against the sun-baked sidewalk. The twins' faces lit up at the sight of a potential customer, their small hands already reaching for the plastic pitcher of lemonade. Asha's fingers wrapped carefully around a paper cup while Amari straightened the crooked sign with pride, adjusting it just so, until it sat perfectly level. "Would you like some lemonade, sir?" Amari called out, her voice clear and confident, cutting through the summer air. "It's only 25 cents. We made it ourselves this morning." Hank crouched down beside their little table, trying to soften his stance. His knees cracked audibly as he lowered himself to their eye level, but his face remained professionally blank, a mask he'd perfected over years on the force. The morning heat pressed down on his dark uniform, and sweat trickled down his back, making the fabric cling uncomfortably to his skin. "Girls," he said, his voice coming out more stern than he intended, the words clipped and official. "Where are your parents? Who's watching you out here?" Amari pointed toward the modest white house behind them, its paint slightly peeling around the window frames. "We live right there," she said matter-of-factly, as if this explained everything, her small finger unwavering in its certainty. Asha, clutching her paper cup like a shield, added quietly, her voice barely audible. "Our grandma's sleeping. She said not to wake her up." Hank's eyes narrowed slightly as he surveyed the quiet house. The windows were dark behind their curtains, drawn tight against the morning sun, and no movement stirred inside. Standing up with a grunt, he walked to the front door and knocked firmly. The sound echoed through the empty porch, bouncing off the walls, but no response came. He tried again, louder this time, his knuckles rapping with authority. Still nothing but silence from within. Reaching for his radio, Hank clicked it on, the familiar static a comfort in the uncomfortable situation. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. I'm at 1247 Maple Avenue with 2 unattended minors. No response from the residents. Please advise. The radio crackled with static before a clear female voice responded. Copy that, Officer Miller. Standard procedure for unattended minors under 5 is temporary protective custody until guardian contact is confirmed. Hank's jaw tightened as he looked back at the girls. They watched him with curious eyes, still holding their cups of lemonade, innocent and unaware of protocol. The morning sun caught the sparkles in their jelly sandals, making them twinkle like stars against the concrete sidewalk. Okay, girls, he said, walking back to their stand, choosing his words carefully. We need to take a little ride while we find your grandmother. I need to make sure you're safe. Amari's brow furrowed, creating tiny wrinkles in her smooth forehead. But what about our lemonade stand? We haven't made any money yet. We'll have to pack it up for now. Hank's voice was gentle but firm as he reached for Amari first. She didn't resist as he lifted her, though confusion clouded her face, her lips pressed together in disapproval. Her yellow sundress rustled like tissue paper as he carried her to the cruiser. Watch your head, he said automatically as he helped her into the back seat, making sure she was properly buckled in. The leather seat dwarfed her small frame, seeming to swallow her up in its vastness. Returning to the stand, he found Asha standing perfectly still, her eyes wide and uncertain, reflecting the cloudless sky above. She didn't pull away when he picked her up, but her body was tense in his arms, rigid with unspoken worry. The paper cup she'd been holding fell forgotten to the grass, leaving a small dark stain where the lemonade spilled out. As he secured Asha next to her sister, the girls exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Asha's voice came out barely above a whisper, trembling slightly. Did we do something bad? Hank's chest tightened at the question, a knot forming beneath his badge, but before he could respond, Amari spoke up with surprising composure. You should call our daddy. Closing the back door, Hank walked around to the driver's seat. The morning had grown even hotter, the air thick and heavy, and his uniform collar felt too tight, choking him with each breath. In the rearview mirror, he could see the twins sitting quietly, their matching yellow dresses bright against the dark upholstery, like 2 sunflowers in a shadow. You should call our daddy, Amari repeated, her voice stronger this time, cutting through his thoughts. Her small face was serious, more determined than afraid, her eyes locked on his in the mirror. Hank turned in his seat to face them, his skepticism evident in the tilt of his head and the slight frown tugging at his lips. Do you know your daddy's phone number? Amari nodded confidently, then recited a number with perfect clarity, not stumbling once over the digits. Hank pulled out his phone, punching in the numbers while silently wondering if this would lead anywhere or just be another dead end. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring stretching out in the quiet car. Then a deep, authoritative voice answered, clear and commanding. This is Marcus Holt, United States Attorney General. The phone trembled in Hank's hand as the deep, authoritative voice continued to resonate through the speaker. His mouth went dry, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. The morning sun, that had felt so warm just moments ago, now seemed to burn through the windshield with accusatory intensity, casting harsh shadows across his uniform. Sir, Hank's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I'm Officer Hank Miller with the Rosewood Police Department. We received a call about unattended minors. Stop talking. Marcus Holt's voice cut through Hank's explanation like a steel blade through warm butter. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Badge number and exact location. Now. Hank's fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. Badge number 2274, sir. We're at 1423 Maple Avenue in Rosewood, Georgia. Listen carefully, Officer Miller. The measured calm in Marcus Holt's voice was more terrifying than any shout could have been. Each word felt deliberate, calculated. You have detained my 4-year-old daughters without cause, without attempting to locate their guardian, who is legally present on the premises. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? In the rearview mirror, Hank watched as Asha pulled a juice box from her little backpack, carefully inserting the straw while Amari helped steady it. The simple, innocent action made his stomach twist with growing dread. These weren't criminals, they were children, his children now, in the worst possible way. "Sir, I was following department protocol for—" "Department protocol?" Marcus's laugh was cold and without humor. It echoed through the car like ice cracking. "Let me explain what's about to happen, Officer Miller. U.S. Marshals are being dispatched to your location. The governor of Georgia is being notified. Your chief of police will be receiving a call momentarily. Do not move. Do not attempt to justify your actions. And do not speak to my daughters unless they speak to you first." The radio crackled to life, making Hank jump in his seat. "Unit 17, this is dispatch. Chief Reynolds needs to speak with you immediately. Priority 1. Sweat beaded on Hank's forehead and trickled down his temple as he reached for the radio with his free hand. Before he could respond, Marcus Holt's voice commanded his attention again. "Put me on speakerphone, Officer Miller. I want to speak to my girls." Hank's trembling finger pressed the speaker button. "Daddy?" Amari's voice piped up from the back seat, clear and unafraid, cutting through the tension like a ray of sunshine. "Hi, baby girl, is your sister with you?" "Yes, Daddy," Asha said softly, still sipping her juice box. Her voice was gentle, trusting. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble at all. You two stay right there, okay? Daddy's coming to get you." The radio crackled again, more urgently this time. "Unit 17, respond immediately. Mayor Davidson is on the line." In the distance, Hank could hear the distinctive whoomp 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 of helicopter blades cutting through the air. The sound grew louder with each passing second. His training told him to respond to dispatch, to take control of the situation, to maintain protocol. But protocol seemed meaningless now, shattered by the weight of what he'd done. His rulebook, his safety net, had disappeared. "Are we going to jail?" Asha's small voice drifted from the back seat, tinged with worry. "No," Amari answered with the certainty of someone much older. Her eyes met Hank's in the mirror, unflinching. "He is." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. He felt himself shrink in his seat. He watched in the mirror as the girls continued swinging their legs, their jellied sandals catching the sunlight with each movement. They seemed completely unfazed by the chaos they'd unleashed, sharing the juice box between them with the easy familiarity of twins. The radio wouldn't stop now. "Unit 17, this is Chief Reynolds. Do not move from your location. I repeat, do not move. Federal agents are inbound." The sound of sirens began to build in the distance, a rising chorus of wails that seemed to echo Hank's internal panic. His phone buzzed with incoming text messages, fellow officers, dispatch, numbers he didn't recognize. The screen lit up constantly, a visual reminder of his spiraling situation. The chief's voice came through again, tighter this time. "Miller, acknowledge the order." Hank's hand shook as he picked up the radio. "Unit 17, acknowledging." Staying in position. Through the speakerphone, Marcus Holt's voice remained steady. "Girls, is the officer being nice to you?" "Yes, Daddy," they answered in unison. Amari added, "But he didn't want to buy any lemonade." A sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances came through the phone. "We'll talk about the lemonade stand later, baby. Just stay put for a few more minutes." The helicopter was visible now, circling overhead like a giant mechanical bird. Its shadow passed over the cruiser in regular intervals, each pass seeming to mark another beat of Hank's racing heart. The sirens were getting louder, multiple vehicles approaching from different directions, converging on him from all sides. "Officer Miller," Marcus Holt said, his voice returning to that razor-sharp calm. "I trust you understand that you will not be moving from that spot until I arrive. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Hank managed to say, the words sticking in his throat. "Daddy, can we finish our lemonade stand after?" Asha asked, her voice small but hopeful. "We'll see, sweetheart, we'll see." Hank set the phone down on the console, his hands no longer trustworthy enough to hold it. In the rearview mirror, he watched as Amari and Asha continued their synchronized leg swinging, passing the juice box back and forth, seemingly oblivious to the growing commotion outside. The chief's final words crackled through the radio. "Do not speak. Do not move. Wait for further instructions. The morning that had started with a routine call had transformed into something far beyond Hank's comprehension. He leaned back in his seat, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a physical force. His career, his future, his identity, all of it hung in the balance because of a single, terrible decision. Through it all, the steady swing of tiny legs and the soft slurping of juice continued in the back seat, a surreal counterpoint to the chaos unfolding around them. The quiet morning shattered as sirens pierced the air. 2 black SUVs with U.S. Marshal emblems rolled to a stop near Hank's cruiser, their tires crunching on the sun-baked asphalt. Red and blue lights reflected off nearby windows, creating an eerie dance of colors across the peaceful suburban street. Hank's fingers gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror where Amari and Asha sat peacefully sharing their lemonade, their small hands passing the plastic cup back and forth. A Rosewood Police Department vehicle screeched around the corner, leaving rubber marks on the pavement, followed by Chief Vernon Briggs's personal car, a sleek black sedan that barely waited to stop before its door flew open. The chief's face was thunderous as he stepped out, his normally neat silver hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, his tie askew and police radio squawking urgently at his hip. The whump 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 of helicopter blades filled the air as news choppers appeared overhead, their cameras already rolling, casting moving shadows across the ground like giant birds. Vans with satellite dishes sprouted like mushrooms along the street, and reporters spilled out with microphones and cameras at the ready, their voices rising in an excited buzz of speculation and commentary. "Officer Miller!" Chief Briggs' voice boomed across the lawn, making several birds take flight from a nearby tree. "Step out of the vehicle now!" Hank's legs felt like lead as he opened the door, the hinges creaking in the tense silence that followed the chief's command. Sweat darkened the back of his uniform shirt and trickled down his spine, and his throat was so tight he could barely swallow. The twins continued their quiet chatter in the back seat, seemingly unfazed by the chaos erupting around them, their small voices a gentle counterpoint to the growing pandemonium. 2 U.S. Marshals approached, a tall man with steel gray hair and weathered features that spoke of decades of service, and a younger black woman whose badge gleamed in the morning sun, her movements precise and professional. The woman's eyes softened when she saw the girls through the window, a flash of maternal concern crossing her face, but her partner's expression remained hard as granite, years of experience etched in the lines around his mouth. "Officer Miller," the male marshal said, his voice clipped and cold as winter frost. "We need you to step away from the vehicle." The female marshal opened the back door, crouching down with a gentle smile that transformed her official demeanor into something warmer, more approachable. "Hi there, sweeties. Would you like some juice boxes? I've got apple and grape." She pulled the drinks from a small cooler she'd brought from her vehicle, condensation already beating on their surfaces. "Grape, please," Asha said softly while Amari studied the woman's badge with interest, her small finger reaching out to trace the metallic edges. Cameras clicked rapidly as the marshals led Hank to the curb, the sound like a swarm of mechanical insects. The concrete was hot through his uniform pants as they made him sit down, the rough surface scraping against the fabric. Chief Briggs loomed over him, his face a mask of barely contained fury, the veins in his neck visibly pulsing. "What in God's name were you thinking, Miller?" the chief demanded, his voice carrying across the now crowded street. But before Hank could answer, a commotion arose from the direction of the house, drawing all eyes toward the front door. Grandma June appeared in the doorway, one hand clutching her floral robe closed at the neck, the other gripping her wooden cane so tightly her knuckles showed white. Her gray hair was slightly mussed from sleep, wisps escaping from her normally neat bun, and confusion clouded her face as she took in the circus that had materialized on her front lawn, the lights and sirens and crowd of strangers turning her peaceful morning into chaos. "What in heaven's name?" she began, then spotted her granddaughters sitting on the curb. Her eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously as understanding dawned, her whole body tensing like a spring about to release. "Who called the police on my babies?" The female marshal quickly approached her, speaking in low, soothing tones, but June's expression transformed from confusion to horror to rage as she listened, each emotion clear as it crossed her face. She shrugged off the marshal's steadying hand and marched toward Hank, her cane forgotten against the doorframe as righteous anger gave her strength, her house slippers making soft shuffling sounds against the walkway. "You arrested my grandbabies over lemonade?" Her voice carried across the suddenly quiet street, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Before anyone could react, she drew back her hand and slapped Hank hard across the face, the crack echoing like a gunshot in the morning air, leaving a perfect red handprint on his cheek. Cameras whirred and clicked in a frenzy, their rapid-fire shutters capturing every second of the confrontation. Phones recorded the moment that would soon flood social media feeds across the nation, their screens reflecting the drama unfolding before them. The male marshal gently but firmly led June back toward the house, while she continued to berate Hank, her voice thick with emotion and trembling with barely contained fury. "They're babies, 4 years old, selling lemonade in their own yard." Each sentence landed like another slap, her words carrying the weight of generations of injustice. Hank's cheek burned from the impact, a throbbing reminder of his mistake, but the shame burning in his chest was far worse, spreading through him like poison. He stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes as reporters shouted questions and social media notifications began pinging on phones throughout the crowd, the electronic chorus growing louder by the second. Tiny twins arrested was already trending, spreading across the internet like wildfire. The female marshal returned with juice boxes and a package of cookies, the plastic wrapper crinkling as she opened it. She handed them to the girls who sat primly on either side of Hank, their yellow sundresses barely wrinkled, their faces calm as they accepted the treats. Small hands carefully opened the juice boxes, the sound of straws puncturing foil oddly loud in the tense atmosphere. They seemed to be the only ones unaffected by the chaos swirling around them, their innocence a stark contrast to the adult world's complications. "The Attorney General is 10 minutes out," someone announced from the crowd, their voice carrying clear across the lawn, sending another ripple of activity through the assembled crowd. The news sparked a fresh wave of movement as reporters repositioned themselves and cameras were adjusted for better angles. Hank felt something nudge his arm, soft as a butterfly's wing. He looked down to see Asha holding out a cookie, her small face serious but not unkind, chocolate chips gleaming in the morning sun. The simple gesture, this offer of kindness from a child he had wronged, made his throat tighten painfully. With trembling fingers, he accepted the cookie, though he knew he'd never be able to eat it. The sweetness would taste like ash in his mouth. Cameras captured it all. The disgraced officer, head bowed in shame, sitting between two tiny girls in matching yellow dresses, their innocent presence highlighting his fall from grace. The chocolate chip cookie trembled in his hand while chaos reigned around them, a small token of forgiveness he didn't deserve, caught in a moment that would soon be shared across the world. The evening sun cast long shadows across Maple Avenue as a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. The day's chaos had settled, leaving behind only echoes of sirens and the faint rustling of papers scattered on lawns. The vehicle's engine cut off with a quiet purr, and the driver's door opened with precise control. Marcus Holt emerged, his 6'2" frame unfolding from the car with the kind of grace that came from years of commanding courtrooms and boardrooms. His charcoal suit was crisp despite the long drive, his presence radiating authority without effort. A U.S. Marshal standing guard straightened and gave a respectful nod, which Marcus returned before dismissing him with a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about his position and influence. Hank stood rooted to the grass, his uniform wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. His badge, usually a source of pride, felt heavy against his chest. The weight of the day's events pressed down on him as he watched Marcus approach. Each step the Attorney General took seemed to make the air thicker, harder to breathe, like the atmosphere itself recognized the gravity of this moment. The twins' faces appeared in the front window, their small hands pressed against the glass. Even from outside, Hank could see the difference in their expressions now. Amari's knowing look, a hint of vindication in her eyes, Asha's cautious observation, her gaze darting between her father and the officer. Their yellow sundresses were bright spots against the darkening interior of the house, like small suns refusing to set. Marcus walked up the path with measured steps, his shoes clicking softly against the concrete. He stopped directly in front of Hank, close enough that Hank could see the subtle lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tight set of his jaw, the controlled anger of a father who had nearly lost everything. When Marcus spoke, his voice was low and steady, each word precise as a knife. "You traumatized my daughters," he said, dark eyes boring into Hank's. "You embarrassed your town. You reinforced everything I've spent my life fighting against." Hank's mouth opened, words of explanation rising to his lips. His hand lifted slightly, a defensive gesture born from years of justifying his actions. Marcus raised one finger, the movement sharp and final. "Don't," he said. "This is not your moment." The simple statement carried the weight of a gavel coming down, closing any avenue for argument. The Attorney General turned away and his entire demeanor shifted as he walked toward the house. The twins burst through the front door, their small feet pattering against the wooden porch like raindrops. Marcus dropped to one knee, opening his arms wide. The girls crashed into him like waves, their giggles breaking the tension in the air, transforming the solemn scene into one of reunion and relief. "Daddy!" Asha buried her face in his neck while Amari pulled back to look at him seriously, her eyes wise beyond her years. "I told him to call you," she said, chin lifted proudly, a tiny warrior claiming her victory. Marcus kissed their foreheads, his hands gentle as he smoothed their hair. "You did exactly right, baby girl. Both of you were so brave." His voice carried a tenderness reserved only for them, a stark contrast to the steel he'd shown moments before. June appeared in the doorway, her cane tapping against the wood as she made her way forward. The stern expression she'd worn all day melted as she looked at Marcus. "About time you got here, son," she said, opening her arms, the simple phrase carrying both relief and gentle scolding. Marcus stood, keeping one hand on each of his daughter's shoulders as he stepped forward to embrace June. Their hug spoke of years of shared history, of Sunday dinners and late-night phone calls, of a bond that went beyond in-law status. June patted his cheek the way mothers do, and Marcus smiled, his first real smile since arriving, a brief glimpse of the man beneath the title. Then he turned back to Hank and the smile faded. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded paper, crisp and official looking, the white stark against his dark suit. "You're probably expecting suspension," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Or maybe you're worried about a lawsuit. Those would be the easy options." He walked back to where Hank stood, still frozen in place. "I'm offering something worse." Hank swallowed hard, his throat dry, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. "You're going to spend the summer here," Marcus continued, "every single day, with my daughters, under her supervision." He nodded toward June. "You're going to sit where you once judged." He held out the paper to Hank, who took it with trembling fingers. It was a typed schedule, detailed and precise, outlining daily activities, times, and responsibilities, created with the same meticulous attention Marcus likely gave to legal briefs. Hank stared at the paper, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. Tea parties on Tuesdays, story time every evening, swimming lessons on Thursdays. The schedule stretched through the entire summer, each day filled with activities that would put him directly in the center of this family's life, forcing connection where he had created division. June stood on the porch, her arms folded across her chest, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. Behind her, through the window, Amari and Asha waved, their small hands moving back and forth like butterflies against the glass, innocent yet knowing. The paper shook slightly in Hank's hands as the full weight of Marcus's decision settled over him. This wasn't punishment. It was education. It was reconstruction. It was an opportunity he didn't deserve and couldn't refuse, a chance at redemption wrapped in playdates and bedtime stories. The evening air grew heavier as crickets began their nightly chorus. The last rays of sunlight caught the twins' faces in the window, illuminating their innocent smiles. Hank stood there, holding his summer sentence, feeling the eyes of both Marcus and June upon him, knowing that tomorrow would begin something he couldn't possibly prepare for, a journey that would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The morning sun couldn't pierce the heavy clouds hanging over Rosewood. Hank Miller sat in his living room, remote in hand, watching his face flash across every local news channel. The sound was off, but the Chirons told the story. Officer detains AG's daughters. Lemonade stand incident sparks outrage. Race relations under scrutiny in small town. Each headline felt like another nail in his reputation's coffin. His phone buzzed constantly with texts from family members and old friends. Most asked variations of, "How could you?" A few defended him. Neither helped. The constant vibrations only deepened his isolation. He switched to the local morning show. A panel of experts debated his actions. One woman, a civil rights attorney, pointed at the camera. "This is exactly what we mean when we talk about systemic bias. Those little girls were on their own property, supervised by their grandmother inside. Would this officer have detained 2 white children in the same situation?" Her words cut through him like a knife. The other guest, a retired police captain, shook his head. "Protocol exists for a reason. Unattended minors require investigation. The officer followed procedure." Even this defense sounded hollow to Hank's ears. Hank turned off the TV and got dressed for work. His uniform felt heavier today, like it was made of chainmail instead of polyester. Each button seemed to take extra effort, as if his fingers had forgotten their daily routine. At the station, conversations stopped when he walked in. Officers who usually greeted him with friendly nods suddenly needed to check their phones or shuffle papers. The break room coffee pot was empty when he reached for it. No one made a fresh pot. The message was clear without a word being spoken. His locker had a bright yellow lemon sticker slapped across it. Someone had written, "Sour Cop," underneath in black marker. Hank peeled it off, but the adhesive left a sticky reminder. He rubbed at it with his thumb, but like his actions yesterday, it wouldn't easily disappear. Chief Briggs called him into the office. "Take a few days," he said, not unkindly. "Let things cool down. Paid leave." "Sir, That's an order, Miller." Hank needed groceries. The local market seemed safe enough. He'd shopped there for years. Mrs. Chen at the register always asked about his mother. Today, she scanned his items without a word, eyes fixed on the conveyor belt. Her silence spoke volumes. In aisle 3, a man in a plaid shirt saw him and deliberately walked the other way. Near the dairy case, someone muttered, "Racist," just loud enough to hear. At the exit, a teenager spat on the ground near his boots. Each small rejection stung worse than the last. The drive to June's house felt like a march to execution. Hank parked across the street, where yesterday's news vans had stood. The house looked different now, less like a crime scene, and more like what it was, a grandmother's home where 2 little girls should have been safe to sell lemonade. The screen door wasn't locked. Hank knocked anyway, but no one answered. He pushed it open gently, the familiar creak sounding unnaturally loud in his ears. June sat in her armchair, reading glasses perched on her nose, Bible open in her lap. She turned a page, didn't look up. The twins played on a colorful rug nearby, dressed in matching purple outfits, moving dolls through an imaginary scene. Neither acknowledged his presence. The room felt colder than the weather outside deserved. "Good morning," Hank said softly. June turned another page. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton. He could hear the ceiling fan spinning, the tick of a clock, the soft whispers of the girls' play. Every sound seemed amplified by the absence of welcome. His uniform, usually a source of pride, now felt like a costume he had no right to wear. I'll be on the porch," he said. No response. The porch swing creaked under his weight. He'd grabbed a Coke from the 6-pack by the door. The schedule said he'd be here all day, and his throat felt desert dry. The aluminum can sweated in his hand, droplets running between his fingers like tiny tears. Inside, he heard one of the twins laugh. Probably Amari, she had a slightly higher pitch. Yesterday, that sound would have been innocent, just children at play. Now it felt like a door closing, a barrier he'd created himself, a reminder of what he'd taken from them, however briefly. The morning stretched into afternoon. Neighbors walked by, some pointing discreetly, others openly staring. Mrs. Pruitt across the street peeked through her curtains periodically. Hank wondered if she felt any responsibility for making that call, or if she still thought she'd done the right thing. A group of kids rode past on bikes. One shouted, "Hey, that's the mean police guy." They pedaled faster, throwing worried glances over their shoulders. Their fear of him was new, and it hurt more than he expected. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same colors that had filled his father's hospital room last month, right before. Hank pushed the thought away. He didn't deserve to feel sorry for himself, not today. Not when his actions had caused so much pain to others. Inside, the twins' giggles floated through the screen door. Once those sounds might have brightened his day, proof that children could still find joy in simple things. Now they felt distant, like music from another house meant for other ears. He had no right to share in their happiness anymore. The swing's chains squeaked as he shifted his weight. 8 hours of silence had taught him more than any shouting match could have. He was an outsider here, and he had done that to himself. One decision, one moment of not seeing those girls as someone's beloved children, had changed everything. The sunset painted the street gold, but Hank felt nothing but shadow. The weight of his badge pressed against his chest like a stone. The morning sun beat down on Hank's neck as he stood at June's front door, clutching the juice boxes like a shield against whatever judgment awaited him inside. His knuckles rapped against the wooden frame once, hesitant but firm enough to announce his presence. The door's hinges protested with a long, mournful creak as June appeared, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes cold as winter stone. Without a word or even the slightest nod of acknowledgement, she motioned toward the backyard with a quick flick of her wrist, turning away before Hank could even attempt a greeting or thank you. He walked through the house, his heavy police boots feeling too large and intrusive on the polished hardwood floors that gleamed under the filtered sunlight. Family photos lined the walls in matching frames, the twins as rosy-cheeked babies with identical gummy smiles, Marcus standing proud in his judicial robes, June younger and smiling with uncomplicated joy. Hank kept his eyes deliberately forward, not wanting to intrude even with his gaze on these frozen moments of happiness that predated tragedy. The backyard was a child's paradise, lovingly created and maintained. Colorful chalk drawings decorated the concrete patio in wild, imaginative swirls. A sandbox with plastic shovels and buckets sat in one corner beneath a shade tree, and a modest playground set with slides and swings took up the far end against the wooden fence. Amari and Asha knelt on the ground side by side, completely absorbed in their artwork, small fingers gripping chalk pieces with serious concentration. Their matching pink t-shirts were already smudged with pastel chalk dust that somehow made them look even more like the children they were. Hank cleared his throat awkwardly. Neither girl looked up or gave any sign they'd heard him. He set the juice boxes down on a nearby glass-topped table and took a seat in one of the plastic lawn chairs, trying to make himself smaller somehow, an impossible task for his 6-foot frame. His uniform felt stiff and jarringly out of place among the cheerful yard decorations and scattered children's toys. The twins worked on their chalk masterpiece, whispering and giggling between themselves in that secret language siblings sometimes develop. Occasionally, one would glance his way with curious eyes, then quickly return to their drawing as if caught doing something forbidden. They moved like mirror images, passing chalk back and forth without needing words, adding intricate details to what appeared to be an elaborate zoo scene complete with cages and fantastical animals. "That's a nice elephant," Hank ventured after 20 uncomfortable minutes of silence. His voice came out rougher than intended, scratchy from disuse. Amari looked up briefly, her expression matter-of-fact. "It's a giraffe," she corrected without heat, then went back to coloring the long-necked creature with careful strokes. Hours crawled by like wounded things. The girls moved from activity to activity with the boundless energy of childhood. The sandbox, where they built an intricate castle system with moats and bridges. The swings, where they pumped their little legs in perfect synchronization, reaching for the clouds. The plastic playhouse with its miniature kitchen, where they set up what seemed to be a very serious business meeting with their stuffed animals as attentive clients. Hank followed at a respectful distance, maintaining what he hoped was an appropriate space between authority figure and children. When they went to the sandbox, he sat quietly on the patio. When they swung, he leaned against the fence, hands clasped behind his back. When they entered their playhouse, he stayed by the door, too large to enter their miniature world. Through the kitchen window, he could feel June watching with hawk-like intensity. She appeared periodically like a sentinel, wiping counters or washing dishes, her presence a constant reminder of why he was there and the fragile trust being tested. Her silence spoke volumes more eloquent than any lecture could have delivered. Around 11, the girls set up a tea party on their little plastic table with the solemnity of diplomats at a summit. They arranged tiny cups with careful precision, seated their stuffed animals just so on miniature chairs, and began serving invisible tea with great ceremony and exaggerated politeness. "Would you like some?" Asha asked suddenly, holding out a pink plastic cup toward Hank. Her voice was soft, but clear as a bell in the quiet yard. Hank stared at the empty cup, frozen in indecision. This was the first direct interaction they'd initiated all morning. He should take it. Every instinct told him he should take it. But something, pride, shame, uncertainty, the weight of his badge, held him back like an invisible hand. "No, thank you," he said stiffly, the words coming out all wrong. Asha's face fell slightly, a cloud passing over sun. She returned to her seat without another word, and the girls continued their party, heads bent close together, whispering again with occasional glances his way that made him feel like an intruder. At lunch, June called them all inside with a gentle voice that transformed to stone when her eyes met Hank's. The kitchen was warm and smelled deliciously of grilled cheese sandwiches and dill pickles. The girls took their usual seats at the oak table, while June placed a plate in front of each of them with motherly care. When she set Hank's down, she moved with mechanical precision, never meeting his eyes, as if he were merely a piece of furniture requiring minimal attention. The twins ate their sandwiches with childish delight, legs swinging beneath the table in matching rhythms, occasionally trading crusts or pickle spears with elaborate negotiations conducted through gestures. They spoke in their special twin language, half words and meaningful looks that Hank couldn't begin to decipher if he tried for 100 years. Every few minutes they'd glance his way with undisguised curiosity, then duck their heads together, giggling behind small hands. Hank ate methodically, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible in this family space where he clearly didn't belong. The sandwich was perfect. Crispy and golden brown, the cheese melted just right with a hint of butter, but it might as well have been cardboard in his mouth for all he tasted it. The silence pressed in from all sides like a physical weight, broken only by the gentle clink of glasses and the girls' whispered conversations that stopped whenever he looked their way. The afternoon stretched on much like the morning, minutes ticking by with painful slowness. The girls returned to their chalk art with renewed energy, this time creating an elaborate hopscotch course that sprawled across half the patio. They added twists and turns, special squares where you had to hop on one foot, spaces where you had to twirl like a ballerina. They played it together, laughing and calling out the rules to each other with the easy confidence of children making up their own world. Hank watched from his chair, noting how they created their own complex universe, complete with its own logic and laws that made perfect sense to them. He saw how Amari always went first, testing the path for her sister with protective instinct. How Asha would sometimes hesitate at a difficult jump until Amari called out encouragement with patient assurance. How they celebrated each other's successes with tiny victory dances, hands clasped together in solidarity. At 4 o'clock, June appeared at the back door, arms crossed over her chest. "Time to go," she said flatly, her first words to him all day hanging in the air like an accusation. Hank stood, brushing chalk dust off his uniform pants with awkward sweeps. The girls didn't look up from their latest chalk creation, what might have been a rainbow or perhaps a bridge to somewhere magical. He walked through the house again, this time noticing a drawing on the refrigerator held by alphabet magnets. 2 stick figures holding hands, labeled a +A in wobbly letters surrounded by a lopsided heart. June held the front door open, her body rigid with unspoken thoughts. Hank stepped onto the porch, turning to say something. Thank you, goodbye, anything to break the wall between them. But she had already closed the door with a quiet finality that stung worse than a slam would have. The porch swing caught his eye as he turned to leave. There on the wooden slats where the girls must have been playing earlier was a chalk drawing, a yellow lemon, detailed with careful lines and shading. Beside it, a small figure with curly hair and a pink triangle dress, and towering over both, a tall figure with no face, just blank space where features should be. An emptiness that seemed to stare back at him with mute accusation. Hank stared at it for a long moment before walking to his car, keys heavy in his hand. The sun was still bright in the cloudless sky, but he felt cold all the way home, as if something essential had been left behind on that porch. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Hank walked up the path to June's house. He'd left his uniform at home, choosing instead a plain gray t-shirt and worn jeans. His police badge felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder he couldn't quite leave behind, like a stone weighing him down with every step. Before he could reach the front door, excited squeals erupted from the side yard. Amari and Asha burst through the gate, their matching braids bouncing with each step, sunlight catching the colorful beads woven into their hair. Asha clutched a bright blue plastic bucket overflowing with toy animals, while Amari waved a piece of paper like a flag, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Mr. Hank! Mr. Hank!" Asha called out, her previous hesitation seemingly forgotten, her voice musical with excitement. "We're playing zoo today." Amari nodded enthusiastically, her chin jutting forward with authority. "And you're the baby giraffe." She pulled a plastic giraffe from the bucket and held it up for inspection, turning it this way and that with careful fingers. "See? We named him Spot." Hank stood frozen, unsure how to respond to their sudden warmth. Yesterday's awkward silence felt miles away from their bright eyes and eager faces that now looked up at him with pure, uncomplicated joy. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "A baby giraffe?" "Yes," both girls declared in unison, their voices creating a perfect, high-pitched harmony. Asha grabbed his hand with sticky fingers, tugging him toward the backyard with surprising strength for someone so small. "You have to crawl like this," she demonstrated, dropping to her knees and stretching her neck out long, her face scrunched in concentration. Hank glanced toward the house, seeking permission or perhaps rescue. June sat in her usual spot on the porch, knitting needles clicking steadily as she watched the scene unfold, the rhythm never faltering. Her face remained unreadable, weathered and wise, but she gave him a small nod that somehow felt like both approval and challenge. Taking a deep breath that filled his lungs with morning air, Hank lowered himself to the dewy grass. His joints protested with audible pops and creaks. He hadn't played like this since he was a kid himself, back when imagination came easily, and dignity wasn't something he worried about. The girls circled him excitedly, Amari arranging toy animals in a precise circle while Asha appointed herself zoo teacher, standing taller as she embraced her new authority. "Now baby giraffes have to learn to walk," Asha instructed seriously, hands on her tiny hips, her voice taking on a teacher's patient tone. "You have to stretch your neck really tall." Feeling ridiculous but committed, Hank extended his neck, trying to mimic the toy giraffe. His movements were stiff and self-conscious at first, earning giggles from the twins that bubbled up like a spring. No, like this," Amari demonstrated, her own neck stretched comically long, her head wobbling from side to side. "You gotta be more wobbly. Baby giraffes are wobbly." Slowly, with their patient instruction, Hank began to loosen up. He let his movements become more exaggerated, drawing delighted squeals when he pretended to stumble and nearly topple over. The girls took turns being different animals. Amari was a bossy elephant who sprayed him with an imaginary trunk, her arms swinging in wide arcs, while Asha became a gentle zebra who taught him how to graze, her fingers plucking invisible grass with delicate precision. The morning sun climbed higher as their game continued, warming Hank's back through his t-shirt. June brought out cups of lemonade, real this time, not the pretend tea from yesterday, the ice cubes clinking musically against the glass. She set them on a small table without comment, but Hank noticed she'd brought one for him too, the condensation already beating on the outside. During a break in their play, Asha ran to get something from behind a terracotta flower pot. She returned with a folded piece of paper, suddenly shy, her eyes downcast. "We made this for you," she said quietly, holding it out with both hands like an offering. Hank carefully unfolded the paper, aware of how important this moment was to her. 3 figures stood hand in hand, drawn in bright crayon colors that had pressed hard enough to leave indentations on the page. The smallest ones wore yellow dresses while the tallest wore blue, Above them, in wobbly letters, was written, Mr. Hank and Us, the K backwards in these, tilted like it might slide off the page. Something caught in his throat as he studied the drawing, a tightness that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Yesterday, they'd drawn him without a face. Today, his crayon self wore a big smile that stretched almost ear to ear. "Do you like it?" Amari asked, peering up at him, her eyebrows raised in expectation. Hank nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment as he swallowed against the lump in his throat. "I do," he managed finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "Thank you." June's voice called from the porch, firm but not unkind. "Lunchtime, girls. Wash up now." To Hank's surprise, Asha grabbed his hand again, her small fingers wrapping around his with complete trust. "You too, Mr. Hank. Grandma made peanut butter sandwiches." Inside, the kitchen was warm and bright, sunlight streaming through curtains that danced in the breeze from an open window. June had set out 4 plates, each with a sandwich cut into perfect triangles, and neat rows of carrot sticks arranged like tiny orange soldiers. The girls chattered about their morning zoo lessons while they ate, occasionally correcting each other's version of events with the seriousness of historians documenting important facts. Hank ate slowly, aware of June's quiet presence at the head of the table, her eyes missing nothing. The sandwich tasted better than anything he'd eaten in weeks, probably since before his father's funeral, though he tried not to think about that dark day with its stiff collars and hollow condolences. "Mr. Hank," Asha said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts, "you're not as scary when you smile." He nearly choked on his carrot stick, coughing slightly. "I'm not?" "Nope," Amari agreed with the confidence of someone stating an obvious truth. "You looked really mean in your police clothes, but now you're just a baby giraffe." From the corner of his eye, Hank thought he saw June's mouth twitch, a ghost of amusement crossing her face, but when he looked directly at her, her expression was neutral again, composed as still water. After lunch, the girls presented him with a parting gift, a paper giraffe they'd colored while he helped June clear the plates, the crayon marks still smudging slightly. "So you don't forget how to be wobbly," Asha explained seriously, her eyes solemn as if imparting great wisdom. Back in his truck that evening, Hank held the paper giraffe in trembling hands. The crude crayon marks blurred as tears filled his eyes, turning the yellows and browns into watercolor smudges. He thought about his father's stern face, about years of learning to be hard, about tiny hands teaching him how to be wobbly again when he'd forgotten such a thing was possible. The first tear fell onto the paper giraffe, darkening the paper, and then Hank couldn't stop them. He sat in his truck and cried, really cried, his shoulders shaking with the force of it, for the first time since he was their age, when showing emotion wasn't yet something to be ashamed of. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees as Hank walked down the sidewalk, a small pink backpack in one hand and a purple one in the other. Ahead of him, Amari and Asha skipped along, their matching sandals clicking against the concrete. The humidity wrapped around them like a thick blanket, making even the short walk to the park feel longer than it actually was. Beads of sweat formed at Hank's hairline as he watched the twins bounce ahead with seemingly endless energy. "Don't go too far ahead," Hank called out, his voice carrying a gentleness that surprised even him. After nearly a week of spending days with the twins, he'd started to learn their rhythms, how Amari always led the way while Asha followed close behind, how they communicated with quick glances and silent nods that seemed to contain entire conversations he couldn't quite understand yet. The playground came into view, its bright plastic slides and swings still glistening with morning dew. The girls' faces lit up at the sight, and they broke into a run toward the swings, their little legs pumping with excitement and their braided hair bouncing against their backs. "Push us, Mr. Hank," Amari called out, already climbing onto a swing, her small hands gripping the chains with determination. Asha settled into the one next to her sister, her small hands gripping the chains more tentatively, her eyes seeking his for reassurance. Hank set their backpacks on a nearby bench and walked over to the swings. He started pushing them gently, alternating between the two girls. Their giggles filled the air, mixing with the sound of birds and distant lawnmowers. The simple joy on their faces made something tight in his chest loosen just a little. After a while, the girls' energy began to wind down. Hank helped them slow the swings and suggested they take a break for snacks. They settled onto the bench, and Hank pulled out their sippy cups and some granola bars from their backpacks, carefully remembering which cup belonged to which girl. The park was quiet except for the rustling leaves above them. Asha took small bites of her granola bar, her eyes fixed on something distant. Then, in that soft voice that always seemed to carry more weight than it should, she asked, "Did you think we were bad kids?" The question hit Hank like a physical blow. The granola bar in his hand suddenly felt heavy as lead. His throat tightened as memories of that Saturday morning flooded back. The call, the assumptions, the way he'd lifted them into his cruiser without really seeing them. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a stone. "No," he finally managed to say, but the word came out too late and too hollow. He could feel the damage in the silence that followed, could see it in the way Asha's shoulders slumped slightly, and how her eyes dropped to her half-eaten snack. Amari, always the protector, jumped in with a silly joke about a monkey she'd seen at the zoo, complete with exaggerated monkey sounds that would normally make her sister giggle. But Asha remained quiet, methodically finishing her snack without looking up. The walk back to the house felt longer than before, weighted down by unspoken words and questions Hank didn't know how to answer. Back at the house, the girls disappeared upstairs to play with their dolls, leaving Hank alone in the kitchen with June. She stood at the sink, washing dishes with deliberate care, her movements precise and measured. Without turning around, she spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet kitchen. "They're different today," she said, her voice carrying years of wisdom and warning. Something changed at that park. Hank leaned against the counter, defensive words rising in his throat. But before he could speak, June turned to face him, drying her hands on a dish towel, her eyes piercing through his defenses. "When you pulled them off that lawn," she said, her eyes holding his, "did you see children, or did you see trouble?" The question struck a nerve, and Hank's frustration burst forth. "I didn't see race," he snapped, his voice sharp in the quiet kitchen, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. June didn't flinch. She just looked at him with those knowing eyes and said, "Exactly. You didn't see them at all." The truth of her words hit him like a slap. His chest tightened with anger, at her, at himself, at the whole situation. Without another word, he pushed past her and stormed out the back door, letting it slam behind him with more force than necessary. The summer air was thick and still as Hank leaned against the wooden fence, his breathing heavy. Above him, the trees swayed gently, their leaves casting shifting shadows on the ground. From inside the house came the sound of laughter, the girls playing, June's warm voice joining in. But now that sound felt distant, separated from him by more than just walls and wooden doors. He closed his eyes, June's words echoing in his mind. "You didn't see them at all." The truth of it burned in his chest like heartburn. He hadn't seen them, not as children, not as people. He'd seen a situation, a procedure, a problem to be solved. And now, when Asha had asked that simple question with those innocent eyes, he couldn't even give her the answer she needed to hear, the one that might have healed something between them. The laughter drifted out again, muffled but clear, a reminder of the joy he'd somehow managed to push just out of reach, a joy that just minutes ago at the park had seemed so close he could almost grasp it. The morning light crept through Hank's bedroom window, but he'd been awake for hours. His eyes felt raw, heavy with unshed tears and too many sleepless nights. The house around him was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that made thoughts echo louder, bouncing off empty walls and settling deep in his bones. In the kitchen, his father's favorite coffee mug sat on the counter where it had been for weeks. A simple blue ceramic thing with a chip on the rim that caught the sunlight. Hank walked past it, refusing to let his gaze linger, though his peripheral vision betrayed him every time. His stomach growled, a hollow reminder of needs unmet, but the thought of food made him queasy. He grabbed his keys instead, the metal cold against his palm. The drive into town felt like an escape. Houses and trees blurred past his window as his grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He needed space. needed air that wasn't thick with the weight of June's watchful eyes, or the twins' innocent questions that seemed to pierce right through the armor he'd spent years building. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects as Hank pushed through the glass door. The bell chimed, announcing his presence to the handful of early morning customers who glanced up briefly before returning to their business. He made his way to the coffee station, focusing on the simple task of filling a paper cup, finding comfort in the routine. "Well, look who it is," the clerk called out, his voice carrying across the store like a thrown stone. "Our local celebrity. Babysitting duty again, hero?" Hank's hand trembled slightly as he snapped the plastic lid onto his cup, the coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He could feel eyes on him, hear the whispered snickers that seemed to follow him everywhere these days. His jaw clenched tight enough to ache, teeth grinding against each other. The bell chimed again. Heavy boots scuffed against the linoleum floor, a familiar sound that made Hank's shoulders tense. "Miller!" Officer Darrell Stevens' voice boomed through the store, cutting through the quiet murmurs. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be setting up tea parties by now." Hank turned slowly, meeting his fellow officer's smirk. Stevens was a veteran cop, the kind who wore his badge like armor and his prejudices like medals, polished and displayed for all to see. "Not now, Stevens," Hank muttered, trying to step past him. Coffee clutched like a shield. "Hey, just giving you some professional advice," Stevens continued, blocking Hank's path with his broad frame. "Maybe next time don't cuff the lemonade princesses, huh?" Something snapped inside Hank's chest, a twig breaking under too much pressure. "Shut up." "What was that?" Stevens stepped closer, his smile turning sharp as a blade. "Didn't quite catch it." "I said shut up." Hank's voice rose, drawing more attention from the other customers who pretended not to listen. "You don't know what you're talking about. Look at you, getting all defensive." Stevens chuckled, but there was no warmth in it, just cold mockery. "Those little girls got you going soft? Or maybe it's that fancy lawyer daddy of theirs that's got you scared. You're out of line." Hank's fingers tightened around his coffee cup, the cardboard beginning to buckle. "No, you're out of line, Miller. Walking around here like some kind of changed man. We all know what you did. Following protocol, right? Until it blew up in your face. Now you're what? Their personal playground, buddy." The coffee cup crumpled in Hank's grip, hot liquid seeping through his fingers. He spun around, marched to the trash can, and threw it in with enough force to make the can rattle against the wall. Without another word, he pushed past Stevens and out the door, the bell's cheerful chime a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. His hands shook as he fumbled with his car keys, dropping them once before managing to get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of the parking lot, leaving black marks on the asphalt and the taste of shame in his mouth. The morning stretched into afternoon like taffy pulled too thin. Hank sat in his living room, staring at the clock, watching minutes tick by, knowing he had to go to the Holtz house. His father's empty mug still sat on the counter, a silent witness to his shame, judging him with its emptiness. When he finally arrived at June's house, the twins were already in the backyard. They waved at him through the fence, their smiles bright and genuine, untainted by the world's harshness. But today, those smiles felt like accusations, arrows finding their mark. He managed a weak nod as he walked through the gate, the latch clicking behind him with a finality that made his chest tighten. The girls had set up their toy kitchen on the patio, plastic plates and cups arranged carefully on a small table, a feast of imagination waiting to be shared. "Mr. Hank," Asha called out, her voice lifting with excitement that made his guilt deepen. "We made pretend spaghetti." "That's nice," he mumbled, dropping heavily onto a lawn chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. The girls exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. They could sense it. The wall he'd put back up, the distance in his voice. The easy rapport they'd built over the past few days crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Hank barely spoke, responding to their questions with single words or grunts. The girls' playful chatter gradually died down to whispers. Even their giggles seemed muted, as if they were afraid to break the heavy silence that had settled over the yard like an invisible blanket. That evening, Hank lay in his bed, staring at the shadows dancing across his ceiling, monsters and memories taking shape in the darkness. His phone screen lit up with a notification, casting a blue glow across the room. Another news article. The Lemonade arrest a month later. He turned the phone face down without clicking it, unable to face more reminders of his mistake. The darkness pressed in around him, filled with echoes of Stephen's mocking voice, the clerk's sneering face, and worst of all, the hurt confusion in Asha's eyes when he'd ignored her invitation to play. His chest felt tight, like he couldn't get enough air, like he was drowning in all the things he couldn't say, couldn't face, couldn't change, the weight of them pressing down on him. His phone buzzed again, but he didn't reach for it. He knew what it would be. Another article, another comment, another reminder of that day. Instead, he lay there, letting the night wrap around him like a shroud, while somewhere across town, two little girls probably wondered what they'd done wrong to make their new friend disappear behind his walls again, leaving only the shell of a man they'd begun to trust. Thunder rolled across the darkening Georgia sky, deep and resonant. Inside the Holt home, shadows danced on the walls as the power flickered uncertainly. Amari and Asha pressed their faces against the window, watching lightning illuminate the clouds in brilliant flashes. "Grandma June," Amari called out, her small hands clasped together in excitement. "Can we please sleep on the porch? We want to hear the sky sing." June looked up from her crossword puzzle, considering the request. The old porch swing creaked gently in the growing wind, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. She glanced at Hank, who sat quietly in the corner armchair, then back at the hopeful faces of her granddaughters. "Well," she said slowly, "I suppose you can, but only if Officer Miller stays out there with you." The girls turned to Hank with matching expressions of pure joy. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but nodded. What else could he do? "We need blankets," Asha announced, already running toward the linen closet. "And juice boxes," Amari added, heading for the kitchen. June watched as the girls scurried around gathering supplies. "There's a flashlight in the drawer by the sink," she called after them. "Don't forget it." Soon the porch became a cozy nest of quilts and pillows. The girls had dragged out every soft thing they could carry, creating a plush island in the middle of the wooden boards. The rain fell steadily now, creating a gentle percussion on the roof above them. Hank sat cross-legged on the edge of their makeshift bed, while the twins sprawled out on their backs, pointing at the sky through the screen. "1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi," Amari counted after each lightning flash, giggling when the thunder followed. "That one was close." Asha sipped her apple juice through a bendy straw. "The clouds are just sleepy monsters," she explained matter-of-factly to Hank. "They're yawning really loud." "And the lightning?" Hank asked softly, surprising himself by engaging in their imagination. "Those are angel flashlights," both girls said in unison, then dissolved into giggles. The storm continued its slow dance across the sky, and Hank found himself relaxing despite everything. The porch swing swayed slightly in the breeze, and crickets chirped between thunderclaps. It was peaceful here in this moment with these children who somehow seemed wiser than their years. Then Amari sat up suddenly, her face serious in the dim light. The change in her expression was so stark it made Hank's chest tighten. "Our mommy died in a hospital," she said, her voice small but clear. Hank felt the air leave his lungs. He hadn't expected this, hadn't known about their mother. The rain seemed to fall harder, matching the heaviness that settled over them. Asha pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "The nurse said it was just pain," she added quietly. She told her to be quiet. Her lower lip trembled slightly. "Mama stopped talking." The words hung in the humid air between them. Hank's throat constricted as understanding washed over him. Another black woman whose pain had been dismissed, whose life had been deemed less worthy of attention. His own recent actions suddenly felt even heavier, more shameful. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and he meant it more deeply than any apology he'd ever given. The words felt insufficient, inadequate against the weight of their loss, against the system that had failed their mother and so many others. Without a word, the girls moved closer to him. Amari leaned against his left side while Asha settled against his right. Their small bodies were warm through their pajamas, trusting despite everything. Thunder continued to roll overhead, but softer now, like a lullaby. They sat in silence for a long time. No more stories about cloud monsters or angel flashlights. Just the sound of rain, of breathing, of occasional distant thunder. Hank didn't move, didn't try to fill the quiet with empty words. He simply existed in this moment with them, bearing witness to their truth, their pain, their resilience. The storm began to fade, moving eastward across the state. The girls' breathing grew slower, deeper. First, Asha's head drooped against Hank's arm, then Amari's. They slid down gradually until they were both curled up with their heads resting in his lap, sound asleep. Hank remained perfectly still, watching the rain through the screen. Each drop caught the porch light, creating tiny prisms in the darkness. Thunder rumbled softly in the distance, a gentle reminder of nature's power and persistence. He had never felt more awake, more present, more aware of the weight of responsibility, not just for these sleeping children, but for all the changes he needed to make in himself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dewy grass as Hank's truck pulled up to the Holt residence. It was barely 7:30, earlier than his usual arrival time. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then reached over to grab 2 small boxes from the passenger seat. One contained fresh sidewalk chalk in every color of the rainbow. The other held a collection of plastic animals and action figures he'd picked up from the dollar store. His boots felt heavy as he climbed the familiar porch steps, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. Before he could knock, movement caught his eye. Amari and Asha were already in the front garden, carefully watering the marigolds with tiny plastic watering cans. "Good morning," he called out softly, trying not to startle them. The twins looked up, their matching yellow t-shirts already spotted with water. Asha gave a small wave while Amari's eyes fixed on the boxes in his hands. "What's in there?" she asked, setting down her watering can. Hank lowered himself to one knee, placing the boxes on the porch. "Just some things I thought you might like," he said, opening the first box to reveal the chalk. Amari's face lit up. "Look, Asha. All the colors." Asha patted over, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the concrete. She reached into the box and pulled out a piece of purple chalk, turning it over in her small hands. "Can we draw right now?" she asked, looking up at Hank with hopeful eyes. He nodded, opening the second box. "There's these too, if you want them." The girls explored the toy box with careful fingers, examining each figure. Amari held up a tiny giraffe. "Like you," she giggled, remembering their zoo game from earlier in the week. They moved to the wide concrete walkway leading to the porch. Hank watched as the girls settled onto their knees, already making sweeping marks with the chalk. After a moment's hesitation, he joined them, picking up a blue piece. "What should we draw?" he asked. "A lion," Amari declared, "a big one with a fluffy mane." Together they began sketching. Hank drew the basic shape while the girls added wild squiggles for the mane, using every color they could grab. Their laughter was soft but genuine as they worked, shoulders touching as they leaned in to add details. Next came a rainbow stretching across the entire width of the walkway. Asha carefully arranged the chalk pieces in order, making sure they used the right colors. "Red goes first," she instructed seriously, "then orange, then yellow." As they worked, June appeared in the doorway. She stood watching, her face unreadable, before disappearing back inside without a word. The screen door closed with a gentle snap. Amari picked up a black piece of chalk and began drawing a tall stick figure. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she added simple features, dots for eyes, a curved line for a smile. Next to it, she carefully wrote Mr. Hank in wobbly letters. Hank felt something catch in his throat as he watched. The simple drawing, the careful letters, they spoke of acceptance in a way that complex words never could. The morning slipped away as they filled the walkway with more drawings. Dragons with spotted wings, flowers with impossibly large petals, Stars and hearts and butterflies all mixed together in a riot of color. Around noon, the screen door creaked open again. June emerged carrying a tray of grilled cheese sandwiches, cut diagonally, and a plate of apple slices arranged in a fan pattern. "Lunchtime," she announced, her voice neutral but not unkind. "Wash up, girls." The twins scrambled to their feet, racing each other to the bathroom. Hank stood more slowly, brushing chalk dust from his jeans. He expected to be dismissed as usual, but June surprised him by saying, "There's enough for everyone." For the first time since this all began, Hank sat at the kitchen table with them. The twins chattered about their drawings while they ate, crumbs falling onto the checked tablecloth. June remained quiet, but passed him the plate of apples without prompting. After lunch, they moved to the living room floor. The girls had found colored string somewhere, and before Hank could protest, they were weaving it through his shoelaces in intricate patterns. "Now your shoes are pretty," Asha declared, tying off a piece of pink string with careful fingers. "Very pretty," Amari agreed, adding a strand of blue to the other shoe. Hank sat still, watching their small hands work. He thought about how, just days ago, he would have pulled away from this kind of intimacy. Now, he let them decorate his boots with rainbow colors, understanding that this was about more than just string and shoelaces. The afternoon light began to fade, signaling the end of another day. As Hank gathered his things to leave, he paused on the porch steps, looking back at their morning's work. The chalk drawings were starting to fade slightly in the heat, but they were still clear, especially the three figures holding hands. One tall, two small, all connected in a chain of simple lines and trust. He smiled, touching the colorful laces of his boots, feeling the weight of something shift and settle in his chest. Behind him, through the screen door, he could hear the twins' voices mixing with the soft sounds of June preparing dinner, a harmony he was slowly learning to recognize as home. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Hank stepped out of his house, coffee thermos in hand. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached his truck, keys jingling. That's when he saw it. A plain white envelope tucked beneath his windshield wiper, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. His heart skipped a beat. No one left notes anymore. Everything was texts and emails these days. With trembling fingers, he plucked the envelope free and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold block letters. "Traitor to your kind." The coffee thermos slipped from his grip, clattering against the driveway. Hot liquid splashed across his boots, but he barely noticed. His eyes darted up and down the empty street, scanning porches and windows for any sign of movement. Nothing but still houses and quiet lawns greeted him. The paper crumpled in his fist as anger and fear coursed through him. He'd been trying so hard this week, playing with the girls, listening to their stories, even letting them decorate his shoelaces. And now this? His jaw clenched as he climbed into the truck, throwing the crumpled note onto the passenger seat. The drive to the Holt house was a blur of racing thoughts and rising fury. Every face he passed on the street became a suspect. Every car in his rearview mirror looked threatening. By the time he pulled into June's driveway, his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He grabbed the note and stormed up the front steps, not bothering to knock. The screen door banged against the wall as he burst into the kitchen where June sat calmly drinking her morning tea. "I'm done," he growled, slapping the envelope onto the counter. The force scattered some sugar packets across the surface. "I tried. I showed up. I didn't ask for this." June didn't flinch at his outburst. She simply set her teacup down with deliberate care, the gentle clink of porcelain against saucer somehow making Hank feel foolish and small. "You came here looking for a pass," she said, her voice steady and clear as a bell. "But you're not leaving with peace." Their eyes met across the kitchen counter. June's gaze held no anger, no judgment, just an unwavering certainty that made Hank's chest tight. The morning light streaming through the window caught the silver in her hair, giving her an almost ethereal presence. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Hank felt exposed, like June could see right through his anger to the fear underneath. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. Without another word, he spun on his heel and headed for the door. The screen door slammed behind him with a force that shook the frame, the sound echoing through the quiet morning air. In the hallway, two small faces peeked around the corner. Amari and Asha stood hand in hand, watching with wide eyes as their new friend stormed away. They'd never seen Mr. Hank like this before. All sharp movements and hard edges. Nothing like the man who'd crawled around their yard pretending to be a baby giraffe. June sank back into her chair, picking up her teacup once more. She looked at the crumpled note on her counter, then out the window where Hank's truck sat idling in the driveway. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she shook her head. "He's either going to run forever," she muttered to herself, stirring her tea absently, "or he's going to rise." Through the window, she watched as Hank's truck pulled away, tires crunching on gravel. The porch stood empty now, the faded chalk drawings from the week's storms barely visible on the concrete. Ghosts of happier moments slowly washing away. The twins crept into the kitchen, their bare feet padding softly on the linoleum. Asha tugged at June's sleeve, her small face pinched with worry. "Is Mr. Hank mad at us?" June gathered both girls into her lap, holding them close. "No, babies. Mr. Hank is mad at himself. Sometimes that's the hardest kind of mad to fix." The morning breeze rustled through the kitchen window, carrying with it the sound of Hank's truck growing fainter and fainter, until all that remained was the quiet tick of the kitchen clock and the weight of his absence. The Sunday morning air hung thick with humidity as the twins perched on the worn wooden steps of their grandmother's porch. Their matching yellow sundresses caught the early light, making them look like two perfect daisies sprouting from the weathered boards. Asha's fingers played with the straw of her apple juice box, while Amari sat untouched beside her. Every few minutes, their eyes would drift down the street, searching. The familiar rumble of passing cars made their heads snap up, hope flickering across their faces before fading just as quickly when each vehicle continued past without slowing. The screen door creaked behind them, its familiar protest announcing June's arrival. She stood there in her old blue slippers, concern etched in the lines around her eyes as she watched her granddaughters maintain their vigil. "Eat your breakfast, babies," she said softly, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Your pancakes are getting cold." Neither girl moved. Asha's legs swung slowly back and forth, her jelly sandals catching the light with each movement. Amari sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, shoulders straight and proud even as disappointment settled around them like a heavy blanket. As morning stretched into afternoon, the reality of Hank's absence became impossible to ignore. The girls didn't ask where he was. They didn't need to. The empty space where his truck should have been parked told them everything their young hearts needed to know. Amari tried to maintain her brave face, busying herself with arranging and rearranging her stuffed animals on the porch swing. But her movements were mechanical, lacking their usual playful energy. Every now and then she'd glance at the street again, her expression hardening just a little more each time. Asha took it harder. Her favorite coloring books lay untouched on the coffee table, crayons scattered exactly where she'd left them yesterday. When June suggested they play dress-up with their princess costumes, Asha just shook her head and curled up in the window seat, pressing her forehead against the warm glass. The house felt different without Hank's presence. The spaces he'd filled with his awkward attempts at playing, his gradual warming to their games, now echoed with emptiness. Even the chalk drawings on the sidewalk seemed faded, though no rain had fallen to wash them away. June watched her granddaughters with a heavy heart as she moved through the kitchen, preparing their favorite dinner. The smell of bubbling cheese filled the house as she stirred the mac and cheese, adding an extra sprinkle of the sharp cheddar they loved. She arranged apple slices in little flower patterns on their plates, just the way they liked them. But at dinner, the girls just pushed the food around with their forks. Asha managed a few bites before setting her fork down, while Amari stared at her plate as if it had personally offended her. June didn't push them to eat more. Some hurts couldn't be fixed with comfort food, no matter how much love went into making it. Bedtime brought its own kind of sadness. June read their favorite stories, doing all the silly voices like always, but the girls' usual giggles were absent. After June kissed them goodnight and turned out the light, The sound of small feet padding across the room broke the silence. Asha slipped into Amari's bed, her quiet sniffles muffled against her sister's shoulder. Amari wrapped her arms around her twin, stroking her hair with the gentle wisdom of an old soul. She didn't offer empty words of comfort or false promises. She just held her sister, sharing the weight of their disappointment in the darkness. Later, when Asha had cried herself to sleep, Amari carefully extracted herself from her sister's embrace. She moved silently through the moonlit room to her backpack, pulling out the carefully folded piece of paper they'd saved since that first day. Their lemonade sign, with its crooked letters and hopeful hearts drawn in the corners. Standing in the pale square of moonlight from the window, Amari looked at the sign for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, she began tearing it into tiny pieces. Each rip seemed to echo in the quiet room, but Asha didn't stir. When the sign was nothing but confetti, Amari walked to the small trash bin by their desk and let the pieces fall from her fingers like snow. She stood there watching the fragments settle among the pencil shavings and crumpled papers, her small shoulders carrying a weight no 4-year-old should have to bear. Then she climbed back into bed, pulling her sleeping sister close. Downstairs, June switched off the porch light, casting one last look at the empty street before closing the front door. The house settled into silence, missing the sounds of laughter that had slowly begun to fill its rooms over the past weeks. Tomorrow would be another day, but tonight the absence of one man's presence spoke volumes about trust, promises, and the fragile nature of hope in young hearts. The morning mist clung to Lake Mapleton like a heavy shroud, turning the world into shades of gray. Hank Miller sat motionless on the weathered wooden porch of his father's cabin. His shoulders slumped beneath the weight of everything he'd been running from. The coffee in his hands had long since gone cold, forgotten as he stared out at the still water. Pine needles carpeted the ground around the cabin, their sharp scent mixing with the earthy dampness of the lake. A loon called somewhere in the distance, its mournful cry echoing across the water. The sound seemed to reach into Hank's chest and twist something loose. Inside, the cabin was a time capsule. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through unwashed windows. His duffel bag sat unopened by the door where he'd dropped it 2 days ago. His police uniform was crumpled inside, along with his badge and the schedule Marcus Holt had given him. His service weapon remained locked in the drawer of his father's old desk, untouched since he'd arrived. Hank's face was rough with stubble, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He hadn't bothered shaving or changing clothes. What was the point? Here, surrounded by nothing but trees and water, he could let himself fall apart without anyone watching. Rising stiffly from the porch chair, Hank moved inside. His boots left tracks in the dust as he wandered from room to room. Everything was exactly as his father had left it. Fishing rods leaned in the corner, their lines tangled with cobwebs. Tools hung on their designated hooks, a thin film of rust starting to form on some of the older ones. Photo frames lined the mantel, showing moments frozen in time. Fishing trips, hunting expeditions, father and son standing side by side but never quite touching. The memories hit him like physical things. Here was the coffee table where his father would clean his guns, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval when young Hank showed more interest in books than bullets. There was the chair where he'd sit silently through lectures about being tough, about not letting people take advantage, about knowing your place and keeping to it. Hank's fingers trailed across surfaces as he moved through the space, leaving clean lines in the dust. Each touch brought back another memory, another moment when words went unsaid and understanding remained just out of reach. The stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed to the second floor. The narrow hallway led to his father's bedroom, still neat as a pin despite the dust. The closet door stood slightly ajar, and something pulled Hank toward it. Inside, hanging garments gave off the musty smell of disuse. Hank pushed aside heavy winter coats and work shirts, each movement releasing clouds of dust that made him sneeze. His hand brushed something solid on the shelf above, a leather-bound book he'd never seen before. Pulling it down, Hank recognized his father's handwriting immediately. The journal was about half full, the pages covered in cramped letters that slanted sharply to the right. His father's words, private thoughts never meant to be shared, filled page after page. Hank sank into the old armchair by the window, the leather crackling beneath him. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Most entries were brief. Observations about weather, notes about maintenance needed on the cabin, complaints about changes in the world he didn't understand. But near the end, on one of the final pages, a single line caught his eye and stopped his breath. "I was wrong about so much. I just hope my boy figures it out before it's too late." The words blurred as tears filled Hank's eyes. He blinked them away and read the line again, and again. His father had never apologized for anything in his life. Not for the harsh words, not for the impossible standards, not for teaching his son to view the world through a lens of fear and judgment. But here, in private, he'd admitted to being wrong. Hank's chest felt too tight. A tear rolled down his cheek and dropped onto the page, darkening the paper. Another followed, and another. He made no sound as he cried, just as his father had taught him. But for the first time, he wasn't crying because of his father's disappointment. He was crying for all the years they'd both spent trapped behind walls of their own making. The truth hit him with stunning clarity. He'd been running from more than just his actions with the twins. He'd been running from a legacy of fear and prejudice, from generations of men who'd been taught that strength meant never questioning, never changing, never seeing beyond their own narrow view of the world. The leather journal sat heavy in his lap as Hank stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lake stretched gray and endless under the clouded sky. The wind had picked up, rippling the surface of the water and stirring the pine branches. Hank stepped out onto the small balcony, letting the wind hit his face. The cold air stung his tear-streaked cheeks, but he didn't flinch. For several long moments, he stood there, feeling the push of the wind and the pull of truth in his chest. Then he turned and walked back inside, not to hide but to pack. The morning sun painted long shadows across the Holt's front porch, where Asha and Amari sat hunched over their coloring books. Their usual cheerful chatter was missing, replaced by the soft scratch of crayons against paper. The purple and yellow flowers they drew seemed duller somehow, missing the spark that usually made their artwork come alive. A familiar rumble broke the quiet. Both girls' heads snapped up at the sound of tires on gravel. A weathered blue pickup truck pulled up to the curb, its paint chipped and faded from years of Georgia sun. The engine cut off, leaving a heavy silence. Hank Miller stepped out slowly, looking different than they remembered. His face was freshly shaved, and instead of his crisp police uniform, he wore plain jeans and a soft gray t-shirt that made him seem smaller somehow, more human. In his hand, he clutched a brown paper bag that crinkled softly with each step. The wooden steps creaked under his boots as he made his way up to the porch. The girls watched him approach, their crayons forgotten. Asha's fingers found Amari's hand and squeezed tight. Neither spoke. Hank's movements were careful, deliberate, as he lowered himself to one knee in front of them. The paper bag rustled as he set it down. "I brought muffins," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to catch in his throat before he added, "I'm sorry I left." Asha's eyes darted to her sister's face, searching for direction. Amari sat perfectly still, studying Hank with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 4 years. Her small fingers played with the edge of her coloring book as she considered him. "Do you still think we were lost?" Amari finally asked, her voice clear and steady. The question hung in the humid morning air, heavy with meaning that went far beyond those simple words. This time, Hank didn't hesitate. There was no fumbling for the right answer, no defensive wall going up behind his eyes. "You were the only ones who knew where you were," he said softly, meeting Amari's gaze. The screen door creaked open behind them. June stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. Her expression gave nothing away as she looked down at Hank. He rose to his feet, wiping his palms nervously on his jeans. "I can't undo what I did," Hank said, the words coming out in a rush now. "But I'm not walking away again. If you'll let me." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I want to keep showing up." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though it was probably only seconds. June's eyes never left Hank's face, searching for something only she could see. The twins remained perfectly still, watching the exchange with held breath. Finally, June stepped to the side, her hand reaching for the door handle. "Breakfast is still warm," she said simply, pushing the door open wider. The kitchen beyond was flooded with morning light, turning the worn linoleum golden. The girls gathered their coloring books and moved inside, their small feet padding across the floor. The sound of their voices started to rise again, soft at first, then growing stronger as they discussed which muffins they wanted. Hank stepped through the doorway, ducking his head slightly as he passed June. He moved to the table and took a seat, not as someone temporary or visiting, but as a person trying to earn their place in this space. The morning light streamed through the window, warming his shoulders as the girls' chatter filled the room around him. The afternoon sun beat down on the concrete steps of the Rosewood Police Department, where Hank Miller sat alone, contemplating the plastic cup of lemonade in his hands. The familiar weight of his badge pressed against his thigh through his pocket, a reminder of both duty and doubt. He hadn't worn it in weeks, not since that Saturday morning that changed everything. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional passing car. Hank watched the condensation drip down his cup, making tiny dark spots on the concrete. His mind wandered to the countless times he'd climbed these same steps, never thinking twice about what his uniform meant to others. A sleek black SUV with government plates rolled to a stop in front of the building. The back door swung open before the vehicle had fully stopped, and out tumbled two tiny figures that made Hank's heart lift. Amari and Asha Holt emerged like miniature diplomats dressed in matching navy blazers and child-sized sunglasses that kept sliding down their noses. Their patent leather shoes clicked against the pavement as they raced toward him. Their energy was infectious, filling the static afternoon air with life. Each girl carried a plastic cup of lemonade, careful not to spill as they bounded up the steps. Their faces glowed with excitement, and Hank couldn't help but marvel at how these same steps, where he'd once felt such shame, now felt like a place of redemption. "Guess what?" Amari announced, practically vibrating with excitement as she plopped down beside him. Her blazer was slightly askew, and her sunglasses had slipped to the tip of her nose. "What's that?" Hank asked, unable to suppress his smile. "We're gonna open a stand in D.C., she declared, straightening her tiny jacket with all the authority of a seasoned businesswoman. Asha settled on his other side, nodding enthusiastically. "Right outside the Capitol building," she added, her voice carrying that quiet certainty that always made her sound older than her years. Hank felt laughter bubble up from somewhere deep inside him, genuine, unguarded laughter that seemed to wash away the last traces of the man he'd been that fateful morning. "Still 25 cents?" he asked, playing along with their grand business plans. Amari's face turned serious as she adjusted her sunglasses. "Inflation," she stated matter-of-factly, though Hank was pretty sure she'd picked up the word from overhearing adult conversations. They sat together on the sun-warmed steps, three unlikely friends sharing lemonade and comfortable silence. The girls' shoes dangled above the ground, occasionally knocking against the concrete in perfect unconscious rhythm. The scene was so different from their first encounter. No sirens, no cameras, no crushing weight of judgment and fear. Across the street, movement caught Hank's eye. Mrs. Evelyn Pruitt stood at her window, watching them through the lace curtains. But something had changed in her stance, in the way she held herself. Her hand didn't reach for the phone this time. Instead, she simply stood there, bearing witness to the transformation that had taken place on her quiet street. Inside the station, Chief Vernon Briggs paused at his window, coffee cup halfway to his lips. He observed the scene below. His officer, the one who'd barely cracked a smile since his father's passing, now laughing freely with the very children whose lives he'd disrupted. The chief shook his head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth before turning back to his desk. The girls chattered about their plans for the DC Lemonade empire, complete with marketing strategies that mostly involved different colored chalk signs. Hank listened intently, offering serious business advice about the importance of having enough ice on hot days. The conversation flowed as easily as the lemonade they shared, sweet and natural. Amari leaned against Hank's arm, her small frame warm against his side. The gesture was casual but spoke volumes about the trust that had grown between them. Asha held out her cup, offering him the last sip of her lemonade with a shy smile. Hank accepted the cup, his heart full. "I'll always be your first customer," he said softly, meaning so much more than just the words themselves. "Some mistakes change the world," a voice narrated, warm and knowing. "But only love can change a man." If you enjoyed the story of Hank, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.